God, gusto tayo mag-hold. Anyways, welcome to my video, which I'm going to basically review. Don't mind that Korean shit on there. I just use that for putting stuff in. I'm going to show you how many Sony stuff that I've got, because this year I actually got a huge jackpot of electronics. First we're gonna start with the recent one. Sony. Another Sony. Another Sony. Another Sony. And another Sony. And last but not the least, another fucking Sony. So basically this is my overhaul of electronics, mostly the boombox, which is this one. A CD player. PlayStation 1. Car stereo, a very nice radio from the 1980s, which is for like broadcasts, but unfortunately it's broken. And a working FM AM radio that I use from time to time so that it won't break. Anyways, so basically all of these I just got it this year. The others were like found from the stack of old stereos. And yeah, basically all of these have its backstory. This one I got this on Facebook Marketplace. This one I got this when I visited the US. This was also shipped from the US. I found this from another stack of old electronics. This one was from a Japanese surplus shop. And this one was given to me by my grandfather. So basically all of these, they're valuable to me. And what I'm going to basically show you today is the story of the sad ICF-SW1 radio, because this thing had a really bad story. Basically I'm gonna go ahead and do the start of the video, and then I'm gonna show you the progress on what I did, and then basically I'm gonna show you what happened to this thing in my recent video, because this one is a very nice, very nice shortwave and FM tuning device that I used for listening to music until the audio IC just broke out of nowhere, and it still receives FM, but there's no sound, nothing. But yeah, so on with the video, and let's go to the past me from the future me that's videoing this video right now. So basically the problem with this Sony that I'm looking at right now is the capacitors have been depleted because it's using electrolytic capacitors, or SMD capacitors in other terms. These capacitors were experimental capacitors made by Sony, which were compact and much more smaller. But the problem with these compact and smaller SMD capacitors, they usually have a lifespan of shorter than older radios, like this other radio that's right here. This one was using the regular caps capacitor, like the capped one you would see on like Chinese consumer electronics. Those ones really last a long time. Well, this Sony, it still uses a very those things can leak on the board and can destroy the contacts. Luckily, it hasn't done anything on this Sony when I disassembled it. But I really took the courage up for like extra 2 days of me thinking if I should take it apart and fix it or just leave it as is. because this radio was most probably the most nicest gift to me by my grandfather. But the problem was, I was really irritated that I can't even use the speaker on it just because of that crappy capacitor that crapped out. At this time, the audio IC hasn't been broken yet, since I haven't really tinkered with it that much on this picture right up here on the screen right now. But in the following video, you're gonna see the problem, and the next video is, and the next pictures is me comparing the radio to another radio that's going to be side by side, a much more smaller radio than the Sony, and the internal parts of it. So now here is the time where we're gonna go ahead and compare the radios. And on the first photo, we're going to see the Indian cheap Chinese knockoff radio. As you can see, it has more or lesser parts, and actually integrated all-in-one amplifier and FM tuner. And the analog is just, as you can see, just has a bit of a part on there. And the next thing is the Sony, which is a more complex Japanese piece of art equipment, which is very, very, very just an art to look at. But one of these things are really a pain in the ass to put through. As you can see, I've put it apart and rewired some wires so that I can put the capacitors in. And also, as you can see, the speaker is much more larger than the other one. And here's the front facing plate of it. And yeah, that's really all that I can say on this radio. Although the Indian radio has a lot to say in terms of it's DSP, digital radio thingy, digital sound processor radio, which is basically an all-in-one chipset. If that breaks, you're gonna go ahead and replace the whole chipset rather than this radio. If the IC breaks for the tuning, you can replace that. If the IC breaks on the audio side, you can replace that. These two radios have one in common, which are the crystal tuning, which I saw there was a crystal diode on the cheap Chinese DSP, while on the Sony it also has a crystal DSP, which improves the tuning since that PLL synthesized tuner, meaning on these radios it means that it can tune on the amplitude of the signal and it won't drift off like older radios, like what I have under my desk right now, which is tucked into my Sony cabinet. And so that pretty much is between these two. The other radio, the Sony one, the ICF-SW1, was made in 1988, which is, this was a pretty pricey radio that I broke. This was like $299 when it was new. Almost $300. The other radio that still functions perfectly fine, and I think it's gonna be useful in terms of what you call this, emergencies. The Indian Chinese knockoff didn't suffer from any capacitor leaks or anything because it's a all-in-one circuit and just has some tiny capacitors on it. That thing is from probably 2007 to like even the latest model right now. Maybe it's based off of 2007 schematics of the radio, because that radio really looks like every radio in the market that I've seen, which I disassembled. But the other one is just FM. It just has two bands, which is FM AM, while this Sony has more than two bands. I forgot how many bands it has, probably 13 or more, since this can also, I think, receive air type transmission, which is like from the airplanes and stuff. The inside of this one is very long compared to the other radio. But the problem is, since it's brittle, it just snapped off one day and I just glued it back on. So basically this radio is just for props and for display purposes anyways, rather than using it. Here's another video of the radio, just playing music in a short time that I fixed the audio IC before it shows its problems again. This radio was really a pain in the ass to fix. It was just full of problems. It just probably made 4 days of my life miserable when I was repairing it. And I can see people complaining why this radio isn't that viable to be used in terms of daily usage, because if this thing breaks, and well, you don't have any service center right now that can go ahead and fix it for you, because this is an obsolete and old radio, and getting another one would maybe need you to spend 200 or 300 more dollars just to get one in a mint box in a mint condition. Although you can get one for like $119. I've seen some deals like that on eBay. But the problem is the capacitors that they replaced it isn't the regular capacitors that they put into here that would last longer. It's still the same SMD electrolytic capacitors that could potentially break in a matter of years. Just a small span of years. I don't really know why they'd replace it like that. Although there's other alternatives that you can actually replace it onto. Probably, most likely, you should avoid this series of radio on Sony. On the other hand, maybe the later 90s models of shortwave radios are pretty great, but the 80s models like this one suffers in capacitor leakage, damage, and other stuff. That's even the backup clock battery inside of it that would have leaked if I didn't take it off sooner. But yeah, it's the owner's it's not really the owner's fault, because they didn't know they had a backup battery on this thing. But just be aware, and if you're going to go ahead and fix it by yourself like what I did, please don't rush it, and find a way to get the proper tools, get a proper flux, get a proper desoldering kit, because I didn't have a desoldering kit when I was fixing this thing, so that's why I kept breaking some contact points and rewiring some stuff in the circuitry. It's really a pain in the ass when I just fixed it and it worked, and then now it just broke. Goddamn. So we're gonna move on to the video that I'm gonna show you. So okay, pag nakabaklas yung radyo, it works. Pero kung ano lang sira nito. Pag nakabaklas yung radio, it works perfectly fine. Pero pag nilagay ko dun sa case niya, I don't know why it doesn't want to function. This thing is just a real mess and a piece of shit to play with. But it works. Considering your tolerance in playing around with radios is very high. For me, sumasakit ulo ko in fixing this thing, so I probably would, after putting it all together again, I'm gonna go ahead and touch it.
From anyone, I'll earn it with my sweat. with the migration crisis reaching critical. の強くなね、多分よくわかるように発信ですけれども、血のつながる父親は何とか。
Before, all of the kids or Gen Z Zoomers have used an iPod to listen to music. Although this iPod is kind of outdated in every way possible, and there's no radio option, you're just tied with music and Apple Music. People back in the day used to use one of these. A transistor radio with FM/AM, but yeah, baby boomers used to use one of these that only has AM. But these things, although they look quite old and doesn't really appeal that much, can have some good quality. Although with the tinny speaker inside of it, this thing sounds better than my brother's Chinese radio. This one's made in Korea.